This time last year, we put out a video all about freaky mountain bikes and tech, and it seems a lot of it surprised you. So let's go again.
Yeah, some of these bikes are hideous, and some of them are frankly scary looking, and some of them were ahead of their time. But some of them are just incredible, and if looks could kill.
Oh.
Let's take a look. Okay, I'm going to start us off with the Quasar fork.
Oh,
okay, so we're talking like 94, 95.
Yeah, I remember those.
And I remember riding a fork very similar to this beast, on the Gervin version of it.
The Vector.
An elastomer fork. They work in a very similar way though, don't they?
They do, yeah. So they're basically linkage forks that hang off the front end of the bike.
Weird.
And we're used to seeing telescopic forks on a mountain bike. So anyone sees a set of these, they're just like, what the heck is that thing?
Yeah.
And you still think that now. I mean, they just look bizarre.
Yeah.
I mean, to be honest, you've dug this one out from the grave
Yeah,
straight away.
absolutely like it.
It has, it doesn't have a proper shock absorber. Well, I'll say that. Yeah, it didn't have a proper shock absorber. It had basically a lump of rubber.
Yeah, it's basically a tennis ball.
MCU foam rubber type stuff on there. And if the weather was particularly warm, it might be a bit softer. And if it's cold, it would be a bit harder.
It was strange. And I tell you, one of the really weird things about riding this fork that I noticed straight away is as you'd go off a drop, and I remember going off drops, it was kind of the first front fork I'd ever ridden on a push bike. As you go off a drop, the fork kind of moves up towards you.
That's right. Yeah.
And it's actually quite a scary thought of that fork coming up towards you, but you get used to it quickly. But that was one of the things that really struck me, nearly in the face.
It was, oh, dude. Well, it was actually one of the selling points with the fork, because you think your back wheel goes slightly backwards and around an obstacle, and they wanted the fork to do the same. So I'm not sure with the Quasar, but the Gervin version of the same fork had like almost a J-bend to the axle path, but wow, I mean, it's a wild looking piece of kit that's pretty rare, and thankfully, we don't see them anymore. Okay, so I'm gonna follow straight on with another fork. Now, this one is even weirder looking. This is the USE Sub 5 fork, and it's literally half a fork. So you might be thinking, oh, it looks a little bit like a Cannondale Lefty, because it's got half a leg, basically, on there, and you'd be right. But it works in a completely different way, and it's got two really odd things. So the first thing is it's round tube, and you think on a single fork that would be all bendy.
Yeah.
But you've got the linkage at the bottom. So the linkage, well, as well as kind of stopping it rotate, it's also an anti-dive linkage. So when you load the brakes up, the fork doesn't compress. I mean, it's pretty supernatural, isn't it? The way that works.
It's very strange. And I mean, so this is made by USE, and who is now Exposure.
Of course,
Exposure lights. But what I think about this fork, right, is I think it looks like a limb, like the flesh has been ripped off of it. And this is like the skeletal remains underneath. You're
thinking a bit Terminator.
It's kind of gruesome looking, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, it's mean. Yeah. It's mean, but you know what I mean? If looks could kill, I think this might do it.
Oh, 100%. And to be fair, my eyes would kill you if you rode it as well. Okay, this time we're putting in a bike, and this one is an X-LITE World Cup bike. So it's actually a prototype made in, actually I don't even know the year, but it would have been like the late 90s sometime. But just look at the thing. It looks like a motocross bike.
It's so cool.
You've got this crazy alloy front end on the bike. I believe it had about 8-inch travel from their own brand fork. So this was a British manufacturer called X-LITE that specialised in small components, lightweight parts, bars, stems. There's a few things whizzing past on screen.
And muck-off.
And muck-off, yes. So if you look on the bike, you'll see a pink muck-off sticker. Muck-off was just one of the products made by X-LITE. And X-LITE, the company, was founded by Rex Trimnell, who was a motocross rider and motorbike racer. Hence the development of the bike that fundamentally looks like a motocross bike. But much later down the line, unfortunately, Rex left us, and his son, Alex, along with the rest of his family, decided the way to put the company forward was muck-off, which was by far their biggest product. And they reformed the company as muck-off, same muck-off that we use here at GMBN.
And I think this bike, because I remember this bike doing the rounds a little bit, and everyone used to just like drool over it. Now, you can look at it now and think the geometry looks way off and it's a wacky idea, but I still think it is an amazing looking thing, and it's quite striking. And if you stretch that bike into the modern day geometry,
if you slacken it off a bit,
I think it would look mega cool.
I agree completely.
So looking back now, it kind of looks pretty gruesome, but oh man, it had the image of the future for us all back then.
Oh man, yeah, this is a killer looking bike. So it's got a real high BB on it, as you can see, not like we have today. But the back end, how it works, is really quite cool as well. So you've got this single pivot, and it's got a concentric pivot. So the pivot is around the bottom bracket axle, so the chain doesn't get any longer.
Yeah.
So it's not going to be affected by the way you pedal, which is super cool and super tech for back then, really. The front fork on it was also X-LITE. It's called the Wampa, 8-inch travel, and apparently it was one of like the smoothest forks you could possibly ride. And so you've got motocross shock on there.
Yeah, it's an incredible looking bike. Did this bike ever race, Doddy?
That bit I'm not actually sure about, because there's another model you can see here in the pictures that Alex did race. And I think Andy Pope raced as well, and a few other team raced, but I'm not sure this prototype actually made it to a World Cup.
What a sight, seeing that come down the hill.
Awesome, isn't it?
Frightening. Okay, the next killer bike is the MILLYARD bike. Now, this is a father and son team. I'm telling you, this is completely homemade. It's unbelievable. It's got a tank shop, right, which is a crazy, crazy setup. Talk me through that, Doddy.
Okay, almost barely know where to begin, but it takes an insanely high pressure in there. So much so, I think you could probably see there's a nitrogen tank in a case next to the bike to charge the thing with. And I forget what I said, but it's something like £900 or something it takes in the shot, or maybe more. But the shock, essentially, when you push down on it, if you feel the bike, it has zero damping. It feels like a spring, and the wheel tracks the ground like nothing else before it and nothing else since this bike. This bike is completely silent over terrain. And
it's incredible.
Steven since has sent us footage of the hover shock using the same technology that's in this shock. Has zero damping until it hit a big thing. And it kicks in by itself, fully automatically. There's nothing else like it, but they couldn't tell us what's inside the shock, because actually they're not allowed to, which just makes it even cooler.
Yeah, it does. And there's other things about it. I mean, it's got this single-sided swing arm. So when you take the rear wheel off, the disc kind of just stays there, right?
Yeah, that's right. The disc stays there, and there's a stub axle, and the wheel just pops off, and you're leaving all your disc rotor and stuff in place. But also, on the inside of that single swing arm is a fully enclosed chain running in oil, and a homemade gearbox.
Oh, it's incredible, this bike. It blows my mind, and the sort of modern geometry version of it, you can see in this picture here, that to me just looks like a thing of beauty. It's like, it's so shocking and a disruptive bike, you know, that I think it's something amazing to behold. I love it.
So a couple of extra cool things about this, and they're probably quite chilling for the rest of the bike industry, to be fair, was that Alan MILLYARD, he's a genius, and I don't think anyone can argue that. I mean, he put a V10 engine in a motorbike because people said it couldn't be done. He was like, well, no, there it is. There's one there. Put a Viper engine in it. It's just crazy, the things that he's done. And essentially, Stephen started racing, this is the son, started racing downhill, and everything they rode, they were just like, why have you designed it like that? That's terrible, that doesn't work, the tolerances aren't very good. And he's like, right, I'll make you a bike then. And we all know an engineer out there that goes, oh, I could do better, but he really did absolutely everything better. And he took it to see Steve Jones from GMBN, who used to work for Dirt magazine. Now, Steve had a downhill track called the 104 on his doorstep that he built, and he used it to test bikes on. And his best ever time on it was 104. Right, so he had a sighting run on the bike just to see what it was like, put in a run, best time he'd ever done.
Wow.
And I think this was something like 8 years later, he was having a conversation with Alan MILLYARD, and Alan dropped a bomb on Steve and just said, by the way, you probably didn't notice at the time, but all your bikes you've done the 104 and had 200 mil travel, this one in here is 140.
Oh, that's crazy.
And it's just like, it's like literally, it's just one of the most amazing things ever.
It's a brilliant bike.
It is, and the rest of the bike industry had a slap in the face when this turned up.
A freak.
Unbelievable.
A freak.
Yeah, and they're doing more stuff now, so keep an eye out. We're going to go and see them soon.
Okay, it's time for some Franken bikes. And I don't want to be mean, but the NICOLAI NUCLEON and the NICOLAI NUCLEUS, these bikes are really, really crazy looking. They don't look like they could work. But Doddy, talk us through that. Really
I mean, Franken bikes are a pretty apt description, to be fair.
Yeah.
So this one is a NUCLEON downhill bike. Everyone's badgering on about high pivots and gearboxes and stuff. These guys were doing this in like the late 90s. Like NICOLAI bikes were on it from the beginning, always looking for the future. And they were cutting and shutting anything together, you know, like madmen up in a lab doing stuff. It literally is Frankenstein in bike form. So a crazy high pivot on that with a gearbox, and basically the gearbox is the idler wheel with the way it's made.
Yeah.
So, you know, it almost looks like a chainsaw in the back, doesn't it? It's just
I mean, the rear
bonkers.
end is so overbuilt and massive. It's you just can't take your eyes off it. I love that build actually with all that Tioga gear on it. I remember riding those Tioga rims and dreaming of having one of those Tioga seats.
Yeah,
actually. So I like
with
that
the white
build.
stripe down the top. Yeah.
But the NUCLEUS, this one's kind of like I don't know. It's nearly like an earlier version of an enduro bike, but it is. I've got to say it, Doddy, it's ugly. It really is. It really is a monster.
I don't think, no offence to Nicola, I don't think they cared about visuals when they were doing this stuff. They were like, let's build the stuff that works. I mean, again, this bike, so looking at the front fork on there, it's a Fox fork. I can only guess it's probably got 130mm travel, I guess. Fox rear shock on there, high pivot, gearbox. The high pivot is the idler wheel, essentially, and that is the gearbox. It's just like, you know it's going to work.
It's crazy. It's so ahead of its time, but yeah, the aesthetics, well.
I mean, it's been hit with the ugly baseball bat, isn't it, to be fair?
These bikes are addressing problems that pretty much 20 years later, the industry is still trying to solve.
Oh, dude, this one's 2002.
It's crazy.
Which, you know, at the time, so many people walked past this bike on the stand at Interbike and they're like, what the hell is that? It's disgusting. But actually, look a bit closer. Like, and it's crazy. Yes, visually, it does look scary. It does look harrowing. But actually, it probably rode pretty well. I think it's really cool. Okay, this is the Karpiel Armageddon. And, well, the name says everything about the bike. Just look at the thing. So you'll see a little sticker on the seat mast there, it says Bender. And it was ridden by Josh Bender, who I'd say he's one of the most influential mountain bikers of all time. An absolute psychopath. As far as what he would jump off on a bike, really nice guy off the bike, but you've got to be crazy to do the drops he used to do on this bike.
Yeah, I mean, literally, he's riding off cliffs on this bike. I mean, massive amounts of travel. So much travel, it's got 24-inch wheels in there for strength, but also to help reduce the size of the bike so he could get on the thing.
Yeah,
it's gigantic.
It's like a horse, really, by comparison, because those front forks, that's the Marzocchi Monster T. In fact, it's a Super Monster T. The Monster T had 8-inch travel. This one's got 12-inch travel, so 300mm of suspension travel.
Yeah.
And it was basically designed for him.
Yeah, I mean, we were watching some clips of some videos of Josh riding earlier on, and we were crying with laughter at some of the stuff this guy would ride off. And sometimes that fork managed to soak it all up.
Yeah.
But more often than not, he'd get thrown off.
Yeah.
But you've got to remember, without Josh Bender, you wouldn't have something like Red Bull Rampage. He was kind of the person that introduced that idea to the sport.
So he's super progressive as a rider in this era. So you're talking, I don't know, like early 2000s at this point, maybe earlier. I lose track of time here. But he came from the world of free skiing. So he used to jump off cliffs, do flips and stuff like that. And thought, I want to do the same on a mountain bike, except you would just disintegrate into smithereens on the floor. So he built the bike using ideas from motocross. He used to ride it in motocross boots. The bike had 12 inches of travel. One of the versions had 2 rear shocks because one wasn't enough.
One wasn't enough.
Clearly. And he used to in fact, we're going to put a little cheeky video link, a real old archive one, New World Disorder, under there, to the jar drop. It's a 60-foot drop. He never actually landed it, but it's just...
I mean, can you imagine just how terrifying it would be to just keep sending yourself off of a 60-foot drop, hoping maybe this is the one.
I can't
Maybe
imagine.
this is the one, it's going to work.
I know, but after each crash is like the worst crash you've ever seen.
Yeah.
And somehow he'd get up like Agent Smith from the Matrix, be like, and just unbelievable stuff. But the Armageddon, unforgettable bike that.
Right, next, if Predator could make bikes, this is it, Doddy. It's the Structure CYCLEWORKS. This praying mantis looking, alien spaceship of a bike. Saw this in the flesh, or skeleton, in Whistler, and I couldn't believe when I saw it. It's incredible.
It takes a bit of time to get your head around what's going on with this crazy thing. So you see a lot of bikes, they're built to look cool and stuff. They didn't try and make it look a particular way. They designed it like this, and it's ended up looking this way. So it's got a linkage fork that's part of the frame. So this, you're buying a whole system here. This is the crazy thing with this bike, because you've got to commit to it from the beginning. It's got 2 rear shocks, one out back, one out front. No suspension fork as such, it's just got a linkage as part of the front end of the frame.
It's incredible.
I mean, it's a radical piece of kit, but it's kind of beastly. Like you say, it's a bit of an exoskeleton look to it.
Yeah.
Wild looking bike. I mean, it works amazingly well. It tracks the ground, it's really stiff. Front suspension has got anti-dive properties to it.
Right.
So your geometry doesn't really change. So it's incredibly well handling, but it's a lot to commit to.
Yeah,
pretty
it
wild
really
looking bit of kit.
I don't know about you, Doddy, but I really see like this kind of like insect-like kind of vibe to it. But like you say, it's there because it works. It looks that way because it's a great idea, but not necessarily a great look. But it really does do its job. But what about this? Let's take it over to the GT. Look at this one. This is the GT concept gearbox bike from 1996. And this is something, I think, that's trying to be something it's not.
Yeah.
Like, this is the opposite of that CYCLEWORKS bike. So it's trying to be a motocross bike.
Well, yeah, this is a bit of a clash of identities here, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think when bike designers were just throwing anything against the wall to see if it stuck, just to see what happened, they got carried away thinking, yeah, motocross is sick, like, let's make our bike like a motocross bike. The only sort of sick this is sick in the mouth. It is absolutely disgusting. But even then, it's got some kind of cool things with it. So look up close, high pivot.
Yeah.
Where have we seen that more recently? It's got a gearbox in there. Well, actually it hasn't. It's kind of a Shimano Nexus rear hub. That's just a 7-speed commuter bike hub. But kind of fair play to them for
trying it,
putting it in there. And it's sort of high pivot, and it's got the chain roots around the high pivot like an idler wheel, but the gearbox is the idler wheel.
Yeah.
So it's kind of doing 2 jobs. But look at the saddle on that thing.
I mean, that's the bit that really diverts my eye, because essentially they've tried to link the frame line up from the head tube to the seat to give it that motocross vibe. But essentially there's just a cycle seat there and some unnecessary material joining the two things together. It just doesn't work for me. But this bike, this is a prototype, but this bike in the end did make it to production, right?
Well, that's kind of the real kick in the teeth, yeah. So they did this in 1996, and then 2006 they basically released the same bike without the shonky saddle on it.
Well, thankfully the really ugly looking bit has gone.
Yeah.
But it's essentially the same bike that you could go out and buy.
Hey, true story here. Chris Smith once had one of those bikes, and he did a massive jump on it. And I heard this big bang, and I wondered what it was. And he suddenly put his bike in the back of the van.
A horror story.
It really was, yeah. I'm sorry to say this, Martin, but the next bike I'm putting in is your NICOLAI Tandem.
Oh, the random Tandem?
It's a work of art. But it 100% is the most terrifying bike known to mankind.
Yeah.
And the thing that almost makes it worse is I kind of feel a bit responsible for that.
Yeah, well, essentially, this was your idea, Doddy. I remember you saying what you need is to be ridden around on a tandem.
You say anything to him when he goes with it.
And I thought, well, actually, that's a really great idea. If I put someone on the bike to do the pedalling for me, then I could just sit on the front and have all the fun that I like to have when I'm on a normal bucket bike. So we essentially joined the two ideas. I spoke to NICOLAI, and these guys, they can make anything. And they were on it straight away, and I was like, I want a downhill ready tandem that's got seating ability for a paralysed rider at the front and a double battery e-bike at the back. And they put it together, and the random tandem was a real thing. And I love riding it, and everybody who comes on the bike with me has a lovely time.
Oh my God!
This is crazy.
Dude!
Oh my God.
Just chill a bit. Just chill a bit, dude. Oh no. Oh. Whoa!
Holy little bit apprehensive about this one. I'll just close my eyes. You're in control.
Oh my.
hands down, it is the most terrifying bike of all I've ever ridden by far. And anyone that's been on it, Warner screaming his head off. Jonesy screaming his head off. I went on it once. You could not get me back on that bike. You need to put a bog roll holder on it because the person out back needs it. I tell you, mate, it's terrifying. But it is an engineering masterpiece.
It really is.
To make that work with the sheer amount of flex and stuff that goes into a bike like that, just that long.
Yeah, and there is a little bit of movement.
Yeah.
There is a little bit of movement.
You need it though. You couldn't, if you had that stiff, you couldn't ride it.
No.
It kind of needs that. But it's what, 200mm travel tandem.
Yeah.
It's insane. Did you take it to Whistler? Am I imagining that?
We took it to Whistler.
Yeah.
We raced A-line. We jumped pretty much everything. There's a couple we didn't do, but we jumped nearly everything there. And yeah, that was actually pretty scary. Jumping on it is maybe a step too far, but you know, it was a day out.
It's the scariest bike of all time, fact. But there's still more bikes to talk about. There's one more coming up.
Right, what's next?
It's the Scott Octane DH. Here's a bike that's very confused.
When I look at this bike, there's so many lines going in all different directions. It's hard to look at it as a race bike, but it is something pretty special.
I honestly don't know what the designers are thinking. So they're like, yeah, we need like 2 saddles. Yeah, we need 2 seat posts. Yeah, let's have 2 shocks on there as well. Oh, let's make the head tube angle adjustable and the bottom bracket height adjustable and the chainstay length. It's just, it's another Franken bike, but I don't think it's quite up there with where NICOLAI were. This thing is in its own realm of weirdness.
It's all over the place, but it does hark back to that idea of trying to turn downhill bikes into motocross bikes. It wants to be that thing, and that double seat post is just the bit where my brain's out. It's like, no, that's too far.
Don't need that.
2 seat posts is not necessary.
But the 2 shock design, I mean, a few brands have tried this and none of them have really made this work. So Corsair made it, they did a 2-shock bike. There was 2Stage that put 2 shocks on a bike, and of course Scott. So you might notice on here, one of them, the core shock, the upper one, does compression and the other one does rebound. That hasn't got a spring on it. They're both completely bespoke shocks, made by Rock Shocks as well. And look at the length of the core spring on that one at the top. Like, what are they thinking?
How long is that?
I don't even know.
Pretty massive.
There's a cool shot actually of Brendan Fairclough just getting a little squish on this bike, because I think he went to see Scott bikes fairly recently and he had to sit on the bike and was just thinking like, what on earth is this thing?
What is it?
Who goes there?
Yeah, it's an incredible bike. I'd love to see it racing down one of the modern downhill tracks to see how it handled it.
Yeah.
That really would be a treat.
Although I've got to say, hats off to Scott Bikes for continuously trying new things over the years. That's something they've always done. They put pull shocks on bikes, 2-seat post bikes. Bikes with more adjustability than anyone needs. You end up making your bike worse rather than better. But it's a wild piece of kit. Definitely not a killer piece of kit though.
Yeah. And I guess that's probably the theme of all the bikes on this list, is a lot of them are very easy to look at and laugh and think, what were they thinking? But everybody on this list was thinking out of the box. They were pushing it. They were trying to see what we could do to develop the sport. And like we've discussed, a lot of them really made a big difference.
Yeah, 100%. I don't know about you guys, but I've got a particular fond favourite in there. I'm going to have to say your random tandem, because it's scary but kind of fun, and it's kind of got modern things, and it's just crazy, to be honest. But I'd love to know what your favourites are. What was your favourite killer bike or killer piece of tech? Let us know in those comments underneath. And we'll see you in the next video.
Happy Halloween.